The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the June 2018 Dibble Second Wednesday webinar. This is Kay Reed, the Executive Director of the Dibble Institute. And with me today we have Carolyn Curtis. Hi, Carolyn.
Hello, good to be here.
Great. And we also have Erin Larson, who's going to be helping us engineer this, webinar. Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Great. So just a little information about this webinar. If for whatever reason you can't get the audio through your computer, your invitation as well as this code on the screen will get you to the audio. Please type any questions you have into the questions box, and at the end of this session we will be answering those, as many as we can, and if we can't answer it, we'll get back to you personally. We will be asking a few raise your hand questions and answer the poll questions. You'll find those on your control panel on the right. And as always, we'll be archiving this webinar a few days after it's completed. So you can share this with others on your staff and your other colleagues. So before I get started, by a show of hands, who has not ever attended a Dibble webinar before? Who's new to Dibble webinars? We'll give you a few minutes to do this.
So it looks like about 20% of the people are new.
Great, great. Well, thank you for all of you who are new. We'll put down your hands now. We're thrilled to have you here and hope you get a lot out of this program. I want to first introduce you a little bit to Dibble, because people often ask me how we got that strange name. And so this is a picture of Charlie and Helen Dibble. They are our founders. And Charlie was very interested in outcomes for youth. He could see the impact of family turbulence on his young friends' families. And so he looked at the research, and he saw that there was a lot we could do to teach young people how to have healthy, long-lasting relationships, but that hardly anything was getting out into the field of a practical nature. So he started the Dibble Institute. It'll be 25 years ago, just about. And we are an independent national nonprofit. We reach all the states and into even Guam and Puerto Rico and beyond over into the UK and Russia. Our materials are all based on research. We get them evaluated as often as we can. And so we served, last year we estimate we served about 76,000 young people with our materials. And that's because we are not a direct service provider. Oh, wrong way. We are not the direct service provider. You are. You and the audience are. And so we appreciate you being on the team. A little bit more about Dibble. And that is, one of our core beliefs is we believe in research. Our materials are not based on what our wonderful authors think or what their opinions are. We base this all on research. So you can be really assured that you have what will be really effective with young people. It also means that from time to time we change our materials because the research may have changed. So that's, if we do change, it's because we're following the research. And secondly, we believe that all young people deserve to be treated with respect. And all people, of course. We talk about relationships. We talk a lot about intimate and romantic relationships. And so because we want to make sure everybody feels comfortable and everybody can get something out of the materials, we don't assume the gender of your partner. We create scenarios that are inclusive of various situations. So it's another key value that we have. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Carolyn Curtis. Carolyn and I met many years ago when she was starting the Relationship Skills Center in Sacramento, California. And since then, she's done a lot of things, but the most recent one is to write our program Mindmatters, a program called Mindmatters, which she will talk about at the end of this program. But most of this program is going to be about how you can create a trauma-informed organization to better serve the youth that you work with. So Carolyn, take it away.
Well, thank you, Kay. And it's always an honor and a privilege to be here and work with all of you. And we'll move to the next slide because we have so much to cover in this very short period of time. And I think we all know from the work that you're doing, it's obvious that early childhood trauma impacts the growth and success in all areas of a young person's life, including their capacity to form and maintain healthy relationships. And let me tell you, this statement is what has really impacted my life. And just to give you a little bit of background about me, as Kay mentioned, I was the founder and director of the Relationship Skills Center, where we got 2 healthy marriage grants. But also, I was a marriage and family therapist for 35 years, specializing in working with couples, alcohol and drug abuse, and trauma. And one of the things that happened when I was running the Relationship Skills Center is I believed in my heart that building healthy families was the key to turning things around. And we used love notes, and it's published by the Dibble Institute. And we used Mastering the Mysteries of Love. And I was happy with the work we were doing and the information we were giving. And I wanted to have more results and more success than we were having. And then I thought, what are we missing? And I realized that we were missing dealing with the underlying problem, and that underlying problem was trauma. So today, the biggest question we have is, how do we most effectively address the needs of traumatized youth in relationships programs? And one is that we know that the people who come to our program bring a history of trauma, and we see that showing up in our classes when people don't return, when we see them staring off in space. All of these kind of behaviors indicate that they are living in trauma. Next slide. First, everyone, in order to become a trauma-informed organization, we're really talking about everyone in an organization needs to understand trauma, including the administrators, the supervisors, and the instructors. And then we need to provide young people relief from distressing experiences by teaching them effective skills to calm and manage their emotions. So Kay, if you would please launch the poll on how many of you are already implementing a program that deals with trauma.
So on your screen is a quick poll. If you would select one of those 3 answers, is your organization currently implementing a program that addresses trauma with those you serve? Wow, excellent. It looks like about 2/3, actually, let me close the poll and I'll show it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Congratulations to all of you. That is great. One is for those of you who are implementing, congratulations for doing that, and congratulations to the people who are here to learn about what you can do. So thank all of you for participating in this. So once we get the organization to start looking at trauma, then we need to provide young people relief from distressing experiences by teaching them effective skills to calm and manage their emotions. Next slide, please. So our goal today is to learn some modest yet proven programmatic changes that your organization can do now. And so I'm looking at this today as what can we do organizationally, and what can we do staff-wise, and what can we do for the people we serve. So moving forward to the next slide. Thank you, Kay. And the basic group that has put together the primary philosophical plan for trauma-informed work is SAMHSA. And they talk about the 4 R's. And the 4 R's are recognizing the wide impact of trauma and understand the potential paths of recovery. That's realized. Recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, family, staff, and others involved with the system. 3, respond by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policy, procedures, and practice. And 4, seeks to actively resist re-traumatization. So these are the 4 R's. What I want you to know is this is an overwhelming kind of view of what we need to do. And this is not something that you're going to go, oh, okay, tomorrow we're going to be trauma-informed. This is all a process. And it's something that you keep working on and working on and working on. And moving on to the next slide. And the next slide is, these are the key principles or philosophy or values that go in a trauma-informed organization. And that includes, making sure that everyone is safe. And that means your staff. I have a friend who was getting stopped by one of the people they were served, and she was greatly distressed when her organization didn't do anything to protect her. So when we talk about safety, we talk about safety for staff, we talk about safety for our participants. Trustworthy and transparency so that everybody knows what's going on, that there's peer support for the staff, for participants, there's collaboration, that everyone is talking and everyone is part of the team, and that people are empowered and people have a voice and choice, and that we take a look and honor cultural, historical, and gender issues. Okay, next slide. So, for many of you, this may be a new, maybe new or not, but we're going to just talk about the ACEs study briefly. And, Vincent Folletti is my hero. For those of you who don't know who Vincent Folletti is, he is a physician who operated out of San Diego in Kaiser, and think about 25 years ago, and he was working in the obesity clinic, and he was getting people to lose hundreds of pounds, 300, 400 pounds. And then he had a group of people who put that weight back on, and when he went and interviewed them, what he discovered was the ones who put weight back on had an incredible history of abuse. And when that abuse got triggered, they ate all of their weight up. He tells the story, and this is the one that brought all of this to attention, of this lovely woman who had lost 300 pounds. And she went to work, and a fellow person at work came up to her who was older and married, and he says, gee, you are really looking good. How about we get it on every Friday night? And that triggered her memory of being sexually abused by her grandfather. And she started eating 24/7. In 3 months, she put on 40 pounds. She talked about sleep eating. She would wake up in the morning and realize in the middle of the night she had gone to the refrigerator and eaten everything out of the refrigerator. When he discovered this, he interviewed or got in touch with 170 people who had put the weight on, and found that there was a history of trauma for all of them. Then he went to Robert Anda at CDC and said, I have this 170 people. I think I have a great study to publish. And Robert Anda said, you don't have enough people in this study. He said, you want people? I got people. So he went back and had every new Kaiser patient, or every person who came in for services from Kaiser in San Diego, and please keep in mind, this is 25 years ago, this is San Diego, this is before Obamacare, so all of these people had health insurance, most of them had college education. and had them take a test. And the test covered these three major areas of abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And what he discovered, okay, and I think we're going to do this back and forth here, Kay. We're going to go to the next slide, and then we're going to come back to this one, okay? So this is what he found. He found in San Diego that 36% had zero. By the way, that means 2/3 of people had at least one major adverse childhood experience. But take a look down here. 4%, 12% had 4 or more ACEs. Now, this is San Diego, you know, with that population I described. The high school where I tried out my Mindmatters curriculum, I worked with 100 high school students in an at-risk community. This is what their numbers looked like. 10% had 0. 45% had 4 or more. And 15% had 7 or more. So let's go back to the other slide here. Okay? Okay. Now, they started, fortunately, because he was able to do this study at Kaiser, he was able to look at the health outcomes for his people who he was serving. And what he found, and that's the second one, the second square, is all of these items on this chart, which include smoking, alcoholism, drug abuse, missed work. I consider for students that's missed school, severely disabled, diabetes. When Robert Anda started looking at these numbers, and what he noticed is if you have 1, your numbers went up a little bit. If your numbers are 2, they about doubled. The numbers are 3, they moved up again. Numbers were 4, they doubled up again. Well, when it got to 5, it went off the chart. You couldn't even chart it for it to make sense. Robert Anda described that he began crying over looking at these numbers. That's what we're dealing with. So let's take a look at, I think we have our next poll here, next line. Next. What do you think is the average ACEs score of the people you serve? And just, you know, give your best guess.
About 62% of the people on the webinar have voted, so we're wait a little bit longer. And you just may need to guess or say that you don't know.
Just guess. This is not a, you know, an official survey.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll. 3, 2, 1. Okay.
4 or more. 4 or 5 or more. That is my guess, is that the people you are serving have 4 or 5 or more. My husband is a senior mental health counselor for the county, working with people that are on TANF. Most of the people who come see him have a score of 5 or more. A huge percentage have 6 or 7. And if they have 10, they never make it in the door because it is too scary to just meet with someone. Okay, onward. Okay, next one. Next one. Okay, so first of all, we have the adverse childhood experience, which is a tree here. And these are all the items that are on the ACEs test that are up here on the top. Homelessness, incarceration, physical and emotional depression, sexual abuse, all of those. That's the tree. And we talk about how many leaves do you have on your tree? You know, because that's how you flourish, with lots of leaves on your tree. But what this ACEs test is leaves out is the adverse community environment. And we need to remember that all of these items are the roots of the tree and affect how our tree flourishes. Is it poverty? Is it discrimination? Is it racism? Is there community disruption? Is the kid going to sleep to gunfire? Is there a lack of opportunity or economic mobility? Are you a refugee who's had to leave everything behind? All of these factors contribute to the amount of trauma that the people come to us with. Okay, next slide. All right. Now, one is important thing for us to know is the environment physically changes the brain. This photograph of the brain of 2 3-year-olds just shows you exactly what we're talking about. So please notice we have that. These are the brains of 2 3-year-olds. The brain on the left-hand side, as you're looking at the screen, is a healthy brain, and the brain on the right-hand side is an abused brain. So notice in a healthy brain up at the top, that is the prefrontal cortex. This is where all of our thinking power comes from. This is where our empathy comes from. This is our ability to think and problem solve. That is all in the front part of the brain. Okay, and you can see in a healthy brain, that's the part of the brain that is being excited and is being used. Now, when we look at the other brain on the right-hand side, you'll notice that the bright red area is at the bottom of the brain, and that is the limbic system. That is the flight-fight center of the brain, and you'll notice that this is what's activated. Please note that the abused brain or is the brain of a 3-year-old from a Romanian orphanage. So we know that environment physically changes the brain. Okay, next slide. So we're going to take a look at how this affects our brain. And the first is, we're going to take a look at 3 parts of the brain. And the first part is the hippocampus. This is our memory system. And we have a brain that is designed for our survival and for us to keep growing and live in the world. So we have our hippocampus, which is our memory keeper. And that memory keeper keeps track of every bad thing that ever happens to us. Because we think if we know all the bad things that happen to us, well, then we can protect ourselves from it. So those memories just stay with us. Think about the time you went in and got an evaluation, and the person who gave you the evaluation, spent a good deal of time talking about what a wonderful job you were doing. You talked about 5 or 6 things that you did that were really wonderful. And then they talked about your challenges or, areas for improvement, and they might just name one. And you walk out, and all you can remember is the one. That is your hippocampus working, and it does a great job. So we hold all of these memories. And it's also important to remember that when we have a trauma memory, it gets stored in many different facets in our brain. So it's not stored in a way that creates a narrative that is easy to deal with. And then we have the amygdala. This is our smoke detector. I love my smoke detector. I mean, it is there designed to protect me. And what it will do, it cannot tell the difference between burnt toast and a burning house. They all make the same sound. And that's what the amygdala does. It is just either go or don't go. And, my story about this is that just imagine, and probably many of you have this experience, you cannot find your car keys and you have to get out of the house right away to make it to an important meeting, and you can't find the car keys. And you're dashing around the house hunting for your car keys. And you can't find them because you keep looking in the same place over and over again. Because, as we move on to the next part, the prefrontal cortex, that is the thinking part of your brain, the one that does problem solving. When that amygdala is running, you do not have access to your prefrontal cortex. Pretty amazing, huh? So all of these pieces all work together, because let me tell you, when you're getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger, you are not going to want to stop and think. You're just going to want to run, and you want every part of your body to take care of that running. And then we know that this affects your hormones and your neurotransmitters. And I'm just including this one today because it's new information that just came out, and it's also very closely related to relationship skills. One is that we know, well, oxytocin is the cuddle hormone. It is the hormone that is released when you nurse and when you give birth. It's designed for bonding. And it's also the part of you, when you have oxytocin secreted, that you want a hug. And amazingly, they have now found that when you have a traumatic experience, oxytocin is secreted, so you want a hug. And I'm sure you can think of some difficult times that you've gone through, and you said, what I need is a hug, okay? Now, for a lot of people who are in the field of relationship education, we know that many times the person turns to the perpetrator and asks and wants to be hugged by them. And I think it's important for us to notice that this is a hormone neurotransmitter issue. So it isn't just the prefrontal cortex that we need to fix, but also for people to have an understanding about that's what's working here. Next slide. So we know that trauma changes the person's relationships, behavior, and learning. And I'm just going to go over this very briefly because we know that in terms of relationship, that the foundation for our relationships come from our early childhood experience. And whether we find that the parent who's caring for us is there or not there. And based on that experience, we make decisions about trusting other people. Also, by the way, they calmed us and soothed us. We learn how to self-soothe and calm ourselves. We learn that we can explore the environment, and we have a sense of ourselves and other people. So we start making decisions about who we are and who other people are. Am I okay? Are you okay? How does that all work out? And then a belief that you can impact the world. And also, one more time, just briefly, people who've been traumatized are highly reactive and impulsive, may be aggressive and defiant, have difficulty with people in authority, and they may do the other direction, which is they may withdraw, and they may move into perfectionism, and that's how they're going to solve it. And the last one that's very important is that trauma changes our ability to learn. That one is that so many times when people have been traumatized, they have difficulty understanding cause and effect, taking another person's perspective. And for me, when I was in the 4th grade, I was in the low math group and the low reading group because my parents were yelling and screaming and arguing all the time, and I would go to school. I would have so much cortisol in my brain that it was on static, like when you look at that TV screen and it's all, that was my brain in school. So when you're under the problems with trauma, it's very difficult to learn. So next slide. This next slide shows all of the ways that trauma affects so many other problems that we don't realize are related to trauma. Depression, drug and alcohol abuse, suicide, life dissatisfaction, and I like to point out people who have multiple sexual partners, and so we're talking about over 50. All of these have some relationship to trauma. Okay, next. Now, when we take a look at becoming a trauma-informed organization, we take a look at moving an organization from being trauma-organized, and that means if you're in a trauma-organized organization, you know you're spending your time putting out fires, and you're reacting and things, and you have an authoritarian leadership. And in this process of moving, then you move to becoming trauma-informed. And trauma-informed means you understand the nature and impact of trauma, and you develop a shared language, and you start recognizing how trauma impacts your entire organization. And the final goal is to become a healing organization where you're reflective, that it's safe to talk about things, a relational leader, and you're collaborative. And that is the goal, is to move from trauma organized to trauma informed to becoming a healing organization. Next slide. So the first step in this is starting with yourself, that all of us, and most of us, bring some level of trauma in our own trauma history to whatever organization we're in. So next slide. I decided at this point we needed a bit of humor. Next slide. Okay, so it was. A coworker asked to hold that thought, and you realize it's been months since you actually had one. Don't you love that? Hilariously, any business jargon starts to make sense. A paradigm for corporate reparenting. This next one I just love. For you, long-term strategic planning means deciding where to eat lunch that day. What are your projections for next fiscal quarter, Ellen? You must be joking. And the last one is, people frequently tell you to get a grip, and you do. Okay, so time out for a joke. Always find it's important when you talk about trauma to take a break. On to the next slide. So the first step is taking care of yourself. And that means having a balance between stressful and nourishing activities, exercise, non-work activities, having a place where you can personally debrief, because the people you're serving, their stories are going to get to you. Recognize symptoms for yourself about when you're getting burned out, and helpers. That means those of you who are working with other people need to recognize that your work is highly specialized work, and your home lives must reflect this. And that means, next slide, that you need to ask yourself, what are my own personal warning signs? On a scale from 0 to 10, what is a 4 for me, and what is a 9? Schedule regular checkups every week, asking yourself, how am I doing? Asking yourself, what do I have control over? And what do I not have any control over? And then, what stress relief strategies do you enjoy? Is that taking a bath, sleeping well, or going for a massage? What works for you? And then what stress-free strategies work for you, such as cutting back on things in our lives that are stressful? It may mean you may need to switch to part-time work, changing jobs, reworking your caseload, whatever it takes to take care of yourself. And then what stress-relieving strategies can I use? So that means doing relaxation or breath work, meditation, yoga. What works for you? Because we first need to start with ourselves. This is that old story about being in the airplane and putting the mask over you first before you put it on your children. Next one. So now we go from the self to the staff. Okay, that's the next key item. Next item is who is leading the charge. And we know from all the work around trauma-informed care that the leaders of the organization have to lead, and they have to say trauma-informed care is important to us, or nothing happens. So if you don't have that kind of organizational support, your road is going to be much harder. Next slide. So these are some of the things that you can do to deal with vicarious trauma. And that means you need to openly discuss and recognize vicarious trauma in the workplace so that you can normalize it, so it is not a big deal. You need to have places where you can debrief about when somebody's story got to you, and taking regular breaks. And mental health days need to be the norm. And there needs to be peer support for looking at when things are difficult or hard. And assessing and changing the workload as needed. And professional development is crucial, so that as if you need to continually feel like you're getting better at your job and you're doing a better job, and that comes from professional development and having regular check-ins. So you need a supervisor who is trauma sensitive and provides that kind of support for employees. And next slide. Okay, from the self to the staff to the people we serve. And next slide, I will tell you that this is where I really have gotten passionate about, and this is a phrase from Dan Siegel about we cannot think our way into a new way of being, but we can grow our brain. And so many times we've had misinformation about what we can do to help people with trauma. And it means, and what this phrase means is that we're not going to talk, to have people talk about their trauma before they're ready to talk about their trauma is just re-traumatizing. So there's no critical incident debriefing, because that has actually been shown to cause more harm. No big stop signs, because that doesn't work. So we had to have a system that works. Next slide. And with that in mind, I developed this Mindmatters Curriculum, and I want you to know I developed this for you. This is what I envisioned going into my Relationship Skills Center, that we could take bits and pieces of it. We could, just add small portions to it, or we could do the whole thing. It's just flexible enough to meet your needs. And it's based on the most current neuroscience and research in the field. And I'm going to go over this briefly, and you can take a look at what you might want to add right now. Next slide. If you don't do anything else, you can start adding self-soothing skills to what you're doing. So next slide. So in self-soothing skills, we have, keep in mind that when we are triggered, the vagus nerve is triggered, and the vagus nerve is centered at the back of your head, and part of the vagus nerve goes up into your face, and the other part of the vagus nerve goes all the way down to your tailbone, and it is attached to every single organ in your body. So in order to calm ourselves down, when we take a look at this at a neuroscience viewpoint, we need to calm down the vagus nerve. And fortunately, there are all kinds of ways to do this. There is peripheral vision, there's breath practice, there's tapping, and yoga. And by the way, not every person is a bit different. We never know which one will work with which person. So when you make a decision to adapt teaching self-soothing skills, you're going to need to offer several alternatives. So I'm going to teach you the one that you are most likely not to know, and that is the peripheral vision exercise. So please bear with me as I try to explain something that's a visual experience verbally. So I want you to pick up your fingers and put your 2 index fingers in front of your eyes. And then I want you to focus your eyes something far out on the wall or through your window, but focus your eyes something forward. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your fingers and you're going to move both of them out to the side slowly until you can, if you just wiggle them, you can just barely see them. That is the outer limits of your peripheral vision. But stay focused forward. And when you do a peripheral vision self-soothing practice, what you do is you hold this for about 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now we know you can't walk around the world, with your fingers in front of your face and moving them out to the side, because now what you need to do is to do it without your fingers. So you're going to look forward, but what you're really going to pay attention to is the outside edge. So please look forward, pay attention to the outside edge of your peripheral vision. We'll do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is a great self-soothing exercise. I just taught this to a group of people from CASA, and I said, you need to teach your kids to do this when they go in to see the judge, because the judge will just see that they're looking right at them, but they're really doing this self-soothing exercise where they're calming themselves down by looking at their peripheral vision. Okay, on to the next slide.
Sorry.
The observing self. Okay, next slide is, we'll go to the next slide quickly, is so many of our people are so reactive and they have never analyzed themselves. They just, something comes to their mind, they say it. Something comes to their mind, they do it. They've never taken the process of slowing things down and figuring out how do they get from here to there. So we teach people how to do this. So first is noticing what comes in through their senses, what body sensations do they have, naming their emotions, naming their thoughts, if there was a memory that triggered all of this, and what was their behavior. When I did this with a group of seventh graders that were deemed most likely to not graduate from high school, and they completed this, they got so excited because they now understood that they could understand themselves. They had a way of understanding who they were and who they are and how come they behave the way they behave. And this was empowering. On to the next slide. All right, relationships. We're not going to spend a lot of time here talking about what we do in relationships, but I want to say that the key item, one of the key items here that you already know, and this is a quote from Harville Hendricks, that people are injured in relationships and people are healed in relationships. So we spend a long time talking about how do you listen to people and how do you really hear people. We talk about developing support systems. We talk about asking for help. And one of the things that is really special is we spend some time doing a loving kindness practice. Well, we are going to take a moment to do this. So I want you to say out loud or to yourself, for yourself, may I be safe and protected. May I be peaceful and happy. May I be healthy and strong. May I be at ease, accepting the changing conditions of life. We recommend that actually you do the other side when you say this to someone else. And what we find for so many of our participants, that first of all, they don't have an internal dialogue that says these kinds of things to themselves. And secondly, they may never have had anybody ever say these other things to them. So this is a healing experience as they move forward in their life. Okay, next slide is self-care. And we spend some time, and these are some items that you need to think about adding to what you're doing, teaching people about efficient sleep, like turning off all the blue lights in the room, going to bed at the same time, not sleeping with a pet or an animal, because it's during our sleep that we consolidate all of our learnings of the day and we integrate our brain. And without adequate sleep, without adequate efficient sleep, we don't do that. So the trauma just keeps building in our brain without that sleep. Focus time is one time again about just focusing on one thing at a time. The last one I want to mention, which is unique and something you may want to consider, is adding items of cultural competency to your programs. So many cultures that we serve have healing rituals and music. If you're in a Native American community, you want to add drumming to what you're doing. If you are in an African American community, there is such a great spiritual tradition of uplifting song, and we need to access that because people who've been traumatized have lost their rhythm. They've lost that kind of connection to rhythm, their rhythm, the community rhythm, and move into healing. And you'll be surprised. I was working with someone in the Vietnamese community, and I said, do you have something like this? And they said, oh, yeah, we do. So we need to bring that back in. Okay, next slide. Now, one of the qualities for someone who has been traumatized is that they don't believe they have a future. If you ask someone who has 7 or 8 aces, and you say, how long do they expect to live? You're talking to an 18-year-old, they'll tell you 21. So why does it matter what I do? Because I'm not going to be around. Robert Zimbardo of the famed Stanford prison experiment has now looked at healing trauma by having people develop a future-focused philosophy that you stay focused forward. Moving next. And that's what we do, is that we have people build their life with direction and purpose. And these are items, and when you do this, you need to make sure that they're doing things that they care about, not that you care about or you think they should do. But what is it that would make it worth their while to get up and go forward and do something? I remember someone talked about that what made sense for them, for a purpose and direction, was to go to Disneyland. Well, we can get behind that. And because that's going to take a while for them to save enough money to go to Disneyland. Now they have moved to future focus rather than just getting through the day in survival mode. About how am I going to get there? So we need to have them have a map for success and creating the life that they want to live. And that will take, and by the way, what we do is we set out goals and we teach them how to do SMART goals. But then what we do is we ask them to bring in their support map and start looking at who can help them get their goals. Because nobody gets from here to there by themselves. We get there from learning from other people who've gotten there before. We get there by associating with other people who want to do the same thing we want to do. We develop this. We find people who challenge us and won't let us get out of, get off track. So we have a support system for us to achieve our goals. And also what we do is we have people to take a look at what their values are and what they care about. And when they establish their values, this becomes their new statement. Instead of I am a loser, it is I'm smart, or I'm caring, or I'm kind. So they now have a new self-statement based on their values. And these are all small, little things that you can do in your healthy relationship education program. But most of all, I would start with the self-soothing skills. Next slide. So I hope you would take this information and use all of this to build healthy communities. And I want to remind you that getting over trauma and building a healthy organization takes a long time, that it doesn't happen rapidly and quickly. It's just this one step at a time. And in order to do that, we need to work together and we need to ask for help. So thank you. And Kay, we have some time for some questions.
Super. Aaron, what questions are you seeing?
Yeah, so one of the questions comes from Penelope, and she said, can the effects reverse the effects of severe trauma on the brain?
Actually, the research is showing that yes, it can. It doesn't happen rapidly, but yes, it can. And that is the new excitement in the field, especially when we've now moved out of trying to get people to tell their story and focusing on building brains. And when we made that shift, then things begin to change. And that's why it's important that you start with all of the self-soothing skills. My favorite story is the story of my husband doing work with this woman, and because he's a counselor working in the TANF program, he worked with this woman for a very long time, and he's told her, every time you find yourself getting upset, use a self-soothing skill. And by the way, he worked with her for a couple of years, and she walked into his office one day and said, I figured it out. She said, when I was really young, I got pregnant, and my parents sent me off to another family. I had that baby. They gave it up for adoption. And then I went home, and nobody ever mentioned it again. So I wondered whether it happened or didn't happen, and now I know it did. And what happened for this woman, she finally had developed enough self-soothing skills that she could actually deal with what was going on without it overwhelming her, so she could move forward. So if you start with the self-soothing skills, and I would start every single class with some kind of self-soothing skill. And if you have time to conclude every class with a self-soothing skill, and encourage people to do self-soothing throughout the week or in between classes. Okay?
Great. And so another question comes from Grace, and this is a little bit longer. So she said, when a young person's amygdala is hijacked and they're reacting to a challenging concept, like when analyzing their own privilege, what would you recommend for a small group setting where the time should be used for the topic that should be addressed, but you don't want to lose that student by not having the time for them to calm down and come back to using the other parts of their brain?
Well, wonderful questions. One is that it is always really good to have a timeout place in your classroom so that if somebody notices that they're getting upset, that they can go sit on a couch, they can go sit on a separate chair in the back of the room. If you have an extra staff member, they may be able to go outside with another staff member, but they really have a place that it's okay to go and calm down. And you need to present that to your class in a way that really makes it okay for them to utilize that, because probably everybody knows in that class that that could happen to them. You know, it isn't just one person, but that everyone could have that kind of experience. So that would be one way I would deal with it, is to begin normalizing it and saying it happens to all of us. And what we need to do is promote self-care. And the way you go to self-care is you go sit in this chair, and you may sound really strange, but teddy bears or a soft cuddly blanket or a comfortable couch, all of those things to make it really easy to self-soothe. Okay?
Great. And then Rhonda's wondering if you have any insights on why are we not seeing mandated healthy relationships and the type of material that you're teaching in terms of Mind Matters in our schools starting in grade school, because she feels like it's almost too late by the time they hit middle school.
I know. I love your question. I will tell you that some schools are really adopting this, and that there is a whole movement around trauma-informed schools. I would recommend that you go to ACES Connection. That's a website, acesconnection.com, and there is a whole section on education. And it talks about what different schools across the United States are doing to bring trauma-informed care to schools. You may want to bring the movie Paper Tigers to your community to show your community about what a trauma-informed school can do. The principal at that school at that time is now making a national tour and talking about what they did to promote trauma-informed schools at that time.
Then Shayna's got an interesting question. So she's actually been using the Mind Matters curriculum in her sexual assault survivors group. And she said, we practiced using the body scan and the 5-4-3-2-1 to help reduce anxiety. The participants are practicing at the group, but not on their own. So any suggestions on how to get them to practice those skills on their own?
One is, I hope you're using the mind, that every student has a Mind Matters journal so that they can track it. One is I definitely think you need to break it down into smaller components so that as you teach the skill and then they come back for the next class, you ask, how many did it once? Okay, and probably nobody will raise their hand. So now you need to break it down to something that's even smaller. How many of you actually thought about doing it? So that now we give them credit for thinking about it. It brings back that old story about, the man walks down the road and falls into a hole and climbs out. And then the next time he walks down and he says, I know there's a hole here somewhere, and he falls into the hole and climbs out. And the next time he walks down the road and he watches himself fall into the hole and climbs out. And the next time he walks down the road, and then he walks around the hole. And then the next time he walks down a different road. And we need to break down practicing. And by the way, if you can get somebody to just practice once, the research on outside of the classroom just shows that it is phenomenal. So in terms of getting people to do it in their lives, you may have people buddy up to remind each other to do it so that there's that peer connection and peer support for doing this. so that they could text each other and say, I did it today, did you do it? Or I didn't do it today, or, anything that just keeps that focus there. So I find teamwork helps, and recognizing that we need to break it down in tinier and tinier steps to get people to do it. I would actually spend some time talking about, and I want you to know, I find it's really difficult. I don't know about you, but I find meditating on a daily basis is a real struggle for me. So they're not alone, and you may share your own story about being a struggle and how you overcome that, and finding ways, and you need to talk about, this is different for everybody. I discovered I just like to meditate when I'm laying in bed. So it isn't something I have to sit up for and be all still. If I just lay down in bed and focus on my breathing, I can do it. But if I have to do this formal sit up and hold my hands in a certain way, I never do it. So people have to find their own way, and you need to give them permission to find their own way and make variations for it. Okay.
Great. And then, Kay, this one might be a question for you or Carolyn. And this comes from Flip, and she said, can you recommend a trauma-informed organization or a person in the Atlanta area that can provide training and professional development for my staff, students, and parents?
Well, Flip will work on that. For those of you who are listening, we know Flip. She's been a friend of ours for a long time, and we appreciate, Flip, that you want to bring that trauma-informed to your organization. And so, we'll figure that out for you. I don't have somebody off the top of my head, but perhaps through ACES Connection, you might want to join that, because it's a national network of people who are interested in trauma and trauma-informed care. So you might look at ACES Connection.
And you may post your request on ACES Connection, and you'll be surprised at how many responses you get. But there are a lot of people on the East Coast doing this work. So, and feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to mention some people who are nationally recognized for their trauma-informed work. It's not cheap. I just want to warn you. Okay.
So
because we're talking about changing a whole organization, so not just a simple one in and one out kind of thing.
Rhonda suggests, who's listening in, Georgia Cares in Atlanta. So Flip, you might, just as it sounds, Georgia Cares.
And then we also provide training as well, where we can come into your organization and provide training on the Mindmatters curriculum as well.
So Carolyn, is there any research on the effectiveness of self-soothing?
Oh yes, it's all over the place. It is phenomenal. The research on this is phenomenal. And that's why we so strongly emphasize it in our program. And every single skill that we teach in Mind Matters is research-based to have shown to be effective in reducing the effects of trauma. So there's just tons of research out there, and I'm not going to quote any of it, but I would certainly, if those of you who want to do more work in this area, I would certainly look at Dan Siegel's work. And actually, he wrote a great book about healing the brain of teenagers called Brainstorm, and which is a pretty phenomenal book. We feel really, I will just say blessed that Dan Siegel is allowing us to use parts of his curriculum and parts of his work in our curriculum. We use one of his meditations, and a lot of his self-care methods come right out of Dan Siegel's work. So we've been really fortunate that the leaders in the field, such as Dan Siegel and Bessel van der Kolk and Eric Gentry, have all been very generous in their use of their material for us to put together Mind Matters.
Okay, is there one more question, Erin?
Let's see. How about so Shayna said, some of our cranial massage therapists joke that what happens to the vagus stays in the vagus nerve until it is released through CST. So yeah, you can use that when you present. So are there any studies that show how this practice helps and the length of time before the effects are actualized?
there's I don't have them right off of the top of my head, but one study that was really interesting was yoga. That they found that yoga, you could actually measure changes within 2 weeks of doing yoga work. And in Mindmatters, we have, I tried all different kinds of yoga practices with young people, and I found that you had to be really careful because they knew how to destroy anything. So I have this great, wonderful 15-minute chair yoga that you can expand on. The video that this person is in has various ones on YouTube that you can use in your class. We do the 15-minute one. He has also our ones, and I do chair yoga because, one, you don't need mats, and anybody can sit in the chair. I tried walking yoga. Young people just bang into each other. So I learned from experimenting about what works and what doesn't work, and chair yoga works. And the research on its effectiveness in a really short period of time is wonderful. The other thing that we do that's unique in this curriculum is something called tapping. And that is when you find that you've been disrupted by something, that you learn how to tap on various acupuncture points. And that relieves, in a pretty phenomenal way, the trauma that you've experienced. It's similar to EMDR in its effectiveness. However, what's different is that you can do it for yourself, and you don't need to be a therapist. So that means it's a tool you can take with you anywhere you go. And the research, they have 80 to 90 different studies all across the world about how effective tapping is. And that's also in our Mindmatters curriculum.
All right. Well, thank you. We are finished for today. I do want to note, someone did ask about trauma and the young people at the border. It is a sensitive topic. Everyone's concerned about it. And I would just say that, one of the most common ACEs is when a young person's family is disrupted. So obviously, this is having a big impact on all those children, and their parents. So we send our best thoughts to everybody for a swift resolution to this. I want to just mention, some of you have been asking about how you can get the links. We'll be sending you a webinar archive link in the next few days. We'll also get a survey out to you immediately. And if you have questions we haven't been able to answer, and thanks for all of those of you who've been piling in, we will get you answers to those questions. So thank you. For those 30% of you that you're new to Dibble, please get on our website. You can subscribe to our newsletter, like us on Facebook, all those kind of things. We want to be available to you and be a resource for your good work. And finally, since we're on the topic of ACEs, we're privileged next month to have David Murphy. He's a PhD research fellow with Child Trends, and he's going to be looking at adverse childhood experiences in terms of their prevalence in the United States. So it's going to be a kind of wonky talk about the data behind ACEs. But I think those of us who are really concerned about ACEs and their prevalence will find it interesting to get the data behind them. So we will send you a link to this webinar, the recording, if you couldn't hear parts of it. We'll also send you links to where you can find Mindmatters on our website if you'd like to look at it further, or if you'd like a review copy, we're happy to send that to you as well. So anyway, we appreciate you attending, and we're going to say goodbye now. Thank you for joining our June webinar, and we'll see you again in July. Thank you.